thank you all for joining us today for Leadership Coaching Strategies, how to set your leaders up for success and hold them accountable. Terry, I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Thank you, Jessie. And I'd just like to start by welcoming everyone on the line and thanking you for being here. I know it's not always easy to take time out of our busy days, and I recognize that, but I'm glad that you're here. And I'm excited to be here with all of you as well as we talk about some leadership coaching strategies. And I want you to know that this session was very thoughtfully designed. We wanted it to be practical in nature. We recognize that many of you that signed up for this particular webinar are HR professionals. So we wanted to present content that you would find that you could use immediately to help you establish accountability and to help you find ways that you could do so within those coaching engagements at your organizations. And as Jessie said, my name is Teresa Pappas, and happy to introduce myself to you now. I'm a consultant and coach with 3D Group, and I'm headquartered here in the Chicago area. My background, the only thing I would add is that, like the other senior consultants at the firm, is in industrial organizational or IO psychology, and as Jessie said, I have worked in the field for over 20 years now. Okay, so today we're going to focus on the topic of leadership coaching in general, but more specifically how you can set up a successful coaching engagement within your organizations, and one that really includes some key things for you to consider to make sure you're on the right path to holding your leaders accountable. As I do so, I'm going to be incorporating not only what we find to be some best practices within accountability, but also incorporating some best practical examples that we hope will resonate. Okay, if you have any questions as we go along, we do want you to take an active part in today's webinar. Just ask that you note those questions as we go through the content as they come up for you. Send them in to Jessie via chat, and we do have that dedicated time built in at the end to address any questions that you might have at that point, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them. All right. Now, just a quick word as we get started about 3D Group. Some of you might not know us as well as others on the line. We are a firm that's been around for over 20 years now. We're staffed by experts in the field of assessment and measurement, and again, all with backgrounds in IO psychology. And with this background, we're able to integrate our knowledge of 360-degree feedback, but even more broadly, leadership development, in a way that helps derive those customized solutions for organizations that foundationally we find are based on accurate data and also then consequently help to provide the best results for our clients. So I think a good kind of thing to keep in mind about the firm is that everything we do is grounded first on obtaining good data, and that includes our leadership coaching work. So just a quick word on who we are. Let's go ahead and jump into the topic of leadership coaching, because truly, everything that we'll be discussing today centers around this, and you might have your own personal experiences, of course, within the field of leadership coaching, and you know directly firsthand how much it's grown tremendously over the last couple of decades. In fact, what we find more and more is that organizations are witnessing firsthand the real benefits of providing a structured coaching support approach to our leaders. And we at 3D Group see leadership coaching as a means to give those leaders additional time and space and expert support to help them reflect on their behaviors, and doing so in a way that allows them to discover and explore new possibilities and new options for themselves, that together will put them in the best position to really start achieving some new outcomes. At the end of the day, if you think about it, what we're talking about is the business case for leadership coaching. When we see different leaders out there in organizations practicing new behaviors and achieving new results for themselves, collectively what that means for an organization can be quite remarkable. Now, an integral part of leadership coaching is exactly what we see reflected on the screen here. It's not at all, as you know, about telling leaders what to do, but instead helping to facilitate that discovery process. And it's through that discovery process that leaders can learn to think about things differently. They're in a position then to explore new possibilities, and possibilities that otherwise they ordinarily may have never considered. And it even puts them in a position to question prior and oftentimes what we find are erroneous and limiting assumptions. So a key benefit of leadership coaching that we find is that it's difficult for leaders when they're operating within a particular dynamic or a known system to even begin considering opportunities outside of it by themselves without support. The Einstein quote comes to mind, right? No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. This is the point of leadership coaching, and this is what plants the seed for coaching accountability. And given this foundation, today's webinar, again, was really developed with you in mind as the HR practitioner. We know that you're often the ones responsible in many cases for coordinating and sourcing coaching and selecting the right coach and making sure that all of the administrative components and critical logistics line up. Even if you're not in that role, you'll be able to leverage some of those coaching support factors, because at the end of the day, it's our goal that everyone on this call can walk away with at least one new insight that's going to help you ensure that you're taking those right accountability approaches so that leaders going through coaching at your organizations are better able to have that hit rate of achieving their coaching targets. Now, as we begin, let's keep in mind there are some foundational components that every successful coaching engagement rests upon, because at the start, it must begin by having that coachee, that leader who's ready to do the hard work and ready to do the heavy lifting and take that candid approach to themselves that will really combine to bring their skills to the next level. So what we're going to be looking at here are some good criteria to keep in mind for you if you consider which individual is really going to be coachable at a given point in time. So something to think about. Are they actively engaged in their current role? Do they appear ready to work on achieving that real and sustainable change to get them to that next level? Do they seem genuinely excited for the coaching opportunity? Do you see them coming to you asking when coaching can start? Are they asking to meet their coach? Are they doing other behaviors that are really demonstrating that, boy, they're all in, they're ready for this? Another thing to think about, are they in a position to candidly explore any skill gaps they have or identify critical goals that they want to address in the coaching? Is this an individual that's ready to explore things accurately for what they are, or are they kind of operating more at a superficial goal level in the coaching? Something to consider there. And are they individuals that demonstrate effective and transparent communication, right? Do they bring things up as they meet their reality? This is what's going to serve them well, not only as they're working on actions outside of the coaching sessions, but it's also going to be impactful if they need to address any issues in the moment during coaching. There may be some candid discussions between a leader and their coach around how things are working, what might not be working, what needs to be changed on either end moving forward. Are they in a position to be able to have that kind of transparent, effective communication? And are they individuals that you see as really being committed to their development? Because we know that coaching isn't always sunshine and rainbows. It's going to get hard at times. Individuals and leaders that you know, think of your own experiences that go through coaching. They're getting grown and stretched in new ways, and at times this is uncomfortable. So it's really going to be their commitment to the coaching that will help them to persevere through those difficult times. They have to really want it. And are they demonstrating leadership courage to candidly discuss how things are going? Present those opportunities and those examples that illustrate, here's where I had a setback. Here's where I might have gotten stuck. Here's what aspects of the coaching are really stretching me farther than I thought and not quite sure what to do about it. These are all key insights that will help make for a more robust coaching experience. And are they there ready to talk about these things? Now, as we take a step back and look at what's on the screen here, this all sounds great. And you might be wondering, okay, if I'm working with an individual like this that has all these things, why do they even need coaching? And why would coaching accountability be a challenge? The thing to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, it's about taking these factors into account to see how open that leader is to the experience. It doesn't mean that they're going to be off the charts on all these dimensions, and it doesn't mean that they're not going to have skill gaps. It just means that you've assessed how open they are to addressing the skill gaps and aligning their needs to a particular coach that can help. And that's really the critical piece that needs to come next, about choosing that coach that fits. For all of us that have been involved with coaching, we know that having that authentic coaching rapport between the coach and leader is essential for it to be effective. And depending on your organization, you may have internal resources to provide coaching, or you may find yourself needing to look externally. And there's some real advantages of each. If we start with both, keeping both in mind, internal and external coaches. Kind of goes without saying that you should have a skilled coach. You should have someone that has gone through some real coaching, formal coaching training there to be able to provide assistance, whether it's internal or external. And in both cases, too, you want that individual to be in a position to kind of leverage their toolkit of development suggestions that they know works, be able to align different development recommendations and things to try based on experiences. Clearly, that can happen in both cases. And you also could have an individual in both cases that can offer assessment interpretation or provide other observation assistance. And in both cases, it's critical that confidentiality is there. So that goes without saying as well. Now, from an internal coach perspective, there's individuals that provide coaching who have all those things that we just discussed that really know your organization's culture and development resources that they could particularly align with. Now, that can be really helpful and can come in handy. And internal coaches also really understand the functional, the organizational, and any interpersonal dynamics that might be at play too. So they have a really good sense, good lay of the land of factors that might foster or hinder that coaching engagement. Now, from an external perspective, there's a coach that has that broad experience across many different industries and companies, and therefore can incorporate different best practices that they've gleaned along the way, provide that additional insight that might not be had at an internal level. Oftentimes, too, feedback that I hear from individuals is that there tends to be a greater perception of confidentiality because it's an external resource. Someone that's really viewed as that trusted advisor and kind of not that buddy or friend that let me ask you some questions and can you provide informal coaching to me. From a cost standpoint, that's an important consideration too, and one thing that we find externally that can help to mitigate that cost piece is that phone coaching oftentimes can be just as effective as in the moment, especially if an in the moment or in-person coaching conversation happened at kickoff. So just some key things to keep in mind when selecting the right coach. Now, we talked a little bit about assessments and observation. We'll talk a little bit more too in just a moment, but they really can provide some additional valuable insight into the coaching process. We might be a little biased because we do so much in 360s, but we believe that 360s and 360 data can be a natural complement to the coaching process in a fantastic way to give initial baseline data that a coach and a coachee, a leader, can use to help target specific development goals. And that's really what we're looking at here. Let's take a moment to explore how they can work together quite effectively. So what we find is that 360 feedback can provide a coachee, a leader, with some valuable baseline awareness to start the coaching. That 360 data can do a few different things. It can validate a strength that the coach and leader can discuss on how that can be further leveraged, how a leader can further lean into that strength in ways they hadn't considered before, and really obtain better and different results by doing so. 360 data can highlight a known development area to improve, and through the course of coaching, simply provide that forum for really getting some traction on that known area. Or it can identify a blind spot, something that completely raises the awareness of the leader, that prior unknown development area, and that's where some of the greatest ahas tend to occur. So in this regard, the coach becomes critical to help that leader accept what their 360 feedback is telling them, instead of that leader just dismissing it or discounting the feedback or becoming defensive to it. So the coach has a really critical role to play to have them understand and accept that new awareness. And this acceptance is essential if accurate and targeted coaching goals are going to be created. And then through ongoing coaching is where the leader, with support from that coach, starts to work on bridging that gap between today and what the future desired state looks like. And then working together is where the coach and leader can foster some very real and remarkable, frankly, sustained behavior change in support of the plan. And that's where accountability comes in, because for it to be effective, it should be an integral piece of that process. Okay. When 360s and coaching work hand in hand with each other, here is just a sample of some of the results that can be achieved. And actually, these are real sample quotes from HR leaders like yourselves, captured in our most recent 360 feedback benchmarking study. In fact, you never know. Some of you on the call may have contributed one or more of these comments that we're looking at here. But the one that stands out to me is on the bottom left of the screen. And it reads, "It's better to have real data to base the coaching on." That comment right there is what I call the so what of it all. You're in a position to make some real data-driven decisions that can then be used to plan targeted coaching and development goals. And you're doing that instead of guessing or instead of basing coaching goals on a more limited perception. And some of you might be wondering from a 360 standpoint, okay, what makes for good 360 data to be included in a coaching plan? And what we find ideally is that 360 feedback will provide the most useful and accurate results when it's based on a regular and frequent cadence of interactions with the raters, right? At a very bare minimum, 3 months of regular and frequent, ideally 6 months or longer, because that provides enough touch points, enough observations of behaviors of that leader upon which the raters could use to base their ratings. And while we're talking about 360s here, another thing to keep in mind is that individuals, leaders going through coaching, can also achieve additional perspective based on data provided by other diagnostic tools as well. In fact, at 3D Group, we use the Hogan suite of assessments quite regularly based on the Big Five theory of personality. There might be others that you use at your organizations. And I like to view each of these assessments as providing additional data points that can help that leader understand themselves better and gain additional awareness about any development areas and why they do things the way they do. This is all quite useful for the coach and the leader to discuss and then to target some planning around. Okay. So now, with 360 and perhaps other assessment data, along with information that's been obtained from the leader, the manager, your observations from an HR perspective, that coachee is in the best position to establish some thoughtful and relevant coaching goals. So a few things to keep in mind about that. The best coaching goals are really aligned with your business's strategic priorities, both overarching at the enterprise level as well as functional. The best coaching goals also provide adequate specificity, right? They give that clear sense as to what actions are to be taken during coaching, and from a behavioral standpoint, really get down to what does that look like in terms of doing more of, or doing less of, or doing differently. They also include criteria for measurement and evaluation, right? What does success look like, and how can we make sure we're all on the same page here? And they address both internal and external support resources. It really provides that broad approach toward development, and not just looking internally, but what is it that the individual can learn from an even external perspective. And they involve what we call a realistic stretch, right? They definitely involve a stretch, but not too much. The key message, or the operative word, I think, is balance. Finding those goals that are motivating, but not overwhelming. And then together, they have the potential for achieving the greatest impact in the long run. Not just in the long run for true north, what end state success looks like, but also what are those opportunities along the way, those interim milestones that can be measured and achieved that will help to motivate them through those short-term gains. Okay, so with the development of some clear, some relevant, some accurate coaching goals, this is where the real fun begins, right, between the coach and the leader, because this is where the coaching conversations happen in an ongoing and structured fashion. And think about your own role as the HR person. While you're often instrumental in setting up the coaching engagement, you're the one getting the request from the leader perhaps, or the individual themselves about the need for coaching. You're critical in finding that right coach. You're working to get all those logistics straightened out to make sure that the coaching is happening in a timely manner. But after that, you might not hear much about coaching until you hear about issues surrounding accountability. Something might pop up, or someone might circle back to you to let you know that there's been an issue. So what we're going to do from this point forward is jump into some of those factors that you can be on the lookout for to indicate that a leader's development progress might have stalled, to help target what your response would be. And then this way, looking at the screen here, you can help avoid being in this position of the poor chicken that we see, right? Which, by the way, is a great example of what accountability does not look like. Okay, so to begin, right, coaching accountability is most effective when everyone involved, all of the key players that we're looking at here, support that accountability. And let's look at how you, representing HR, along with the coachee, along with the coach and their manager, can work together to ensure that accountability. So first and foremost, the leader, the coachee, they need to be ready and engaged for the coaching. They need to personally own their development goals, their priorities, their actions, and their progress, all of those elements that we spoke about in terms of what makes a good coachee. From an internal or external coach perspective, that right coach is going to engage with the leader in the moment. They're going to hold up the mirror in the moment as they need to, and they're going to follow up on any expected actions and progress through their ongoing coaching. Now, the manager also has a very critical role to play because they're the ones that are there on a day-to-day basis oftentimes. So what is it that they can do to seize those what we call coachable moments during the workday? How can they provide that ongoing feedback, both positive and constructive, where they may need to hold up the mirror themselves or have a difficult conversation? And what is it that they're doing to make sure that they acquire any additional needed resources or effective tools to help that individual in their development? And then human resources, right? We've bolded it for a reason. You within human resources have a critical role to play because you probably have already found yourself in coaching at your organizations kind of serving as that additional confidential resource. You've probably known and found ways to help identify any enterprise-wide development opportunities that can align with a particular leader's goals, and there to help ensure that strategic alignment. Also there to consult as needed, right, depending on the situation and the individual, on organizational policies and practices. And you'll likely also help to coordinate what we call critical accountability touch points. In fact, oftentimes it is HR who is involved with coordinating that coaching engagement, sourcing, etc., that we spoke about earlier. So beginning by making sure that all involved here are on the same page from the beginning in terms of coaching expectations, roles, responsibilities, goals, etc., is going to be critical. And from an accountability perspective, those touch points with individuals listed here on the screen ideally will happen at specified times, at coaching kickoff. That's where this initial discussion happens to vet and finalize the coaching plan after the leader and coach have had an opportunity to meet and to go through any assessment, 360 or other feedback, and then draft a coaching plan. That's where the kickoff session happens, and they're able to vet that and share that with the leader's manager and a representative from human resources. And beyond that, a midpoint check-in can be very helpful, and then a final progress check-in all goes a long way to help establish that accountability toward progress on that plan. You obviously will determine what that best cadence is, right, to any additional HR touch points that you might want to have with the leader individually based on the length of the coaching engagement. And ongoing coaching at 3D Group typically is contracted in 6-month increments, which is pretty nice because at that final check-in, we're able then to determine if more coaching is needed or not, and if not, how that internal HR resource and the manager and the leader will then work together to take it from there. All right, so regardless of your role in the coaching relationship, across all of those individuals that we just looked at, these same accountability best practices are going to be critical. Everyone should be on the same page in terms of the coaching goals and what's trying to be achieved together. And everyone should be on the same page in terms of the buy-in and what they see as their and your individual support activities and ways that you can uniquely support based on your role and being bought into that. And then all, from a monitoring standpoint, is what we're looking at here. Everyone agreeing to any specific milestones or clearly articulated results that can be monitored along the way to ensure that coaching goals are tracking on point and in the right direction. And then two-way feedback. Candid feedback is another best practice that should exist between coach, leader, and anyone else providing coaching support. This is the opportunity to discuss what's working well as where shifts might be needed along the way. And then here we're talking about evaluation and monitoring from an end post perspective. Once that goal has been accomplished, is everyone in agreement around those final desired outcomes and where things are in relation to that at the end? Okay, so what we're going to do now is delve into how you can tailor your strategy in doing your part to ensure coaching accountability. And let's take a step back because we're going to walk through each of these individually in just a moment. But have you ever found yourself in a position after carefully identifying a coach, after working with a leader and their manager on the need and goals for coaching, and after reviewing what you thought were some pretty clear and well-articulated coaching goals, only to find that at the end, the coaching results kind of fell flat, right? Didn't really achieve those desired outcomes. This is why we present this. We hope that it will lend you with some new insight. And what we'll be looking at are some main profiles that tend to capture what we find are common accountability challenges. And we'll do so in a way to help raise your radar and determine what that best course of action might need to be from an HR or other perspective. But we're going to emphasize some practical strategies and approaches that you can take in doing so. So as I walk through, think about the information presented here and think about how it relates to you and how you see yourself reaching out and checking in with leaders at your organizations who might be going through coaching and may reflect one of these particular challenges. All right, let's start with the star performer. Think about someone who might fit this within your organization. And what we're talking about here are individuals who are highly capable. In fact, you might have them identified as a high PO or a high potential. They might be on someone's succession plan in a 9-box, for example. Very future-focused, very promotable, and they know it. However, they still have 1 or 2 key areas where they could use development. Represents perhaps a skill gap that will help get them to the next level that they'll need to address before they want to move or can move to that next level. But unfortunately, because of their many successes, they might view these improvement areas as either minor or unimportant in the grand scheme of things. They also, at times, may rub others the wrong way, either due to their high standards, impatience, lack of awareness of their skill gaps, or simply by challenging others because they oftentimes tend to know best. All right, now, what are some considerations to think about when holding that star leader accountable during coaching? On the left here are some strategies to consider that tend to work. On the right are others that won't work as well. Now, I'm not going to read through these one by one. I know you all know how to read, but I do want to highlight just a couple of key points as we walk through. So from what you might want to do from an HR or other supporting role that tends to work, from an accountability perspective in particular. Let's look just for a moment together. Bullet 4 on the left. Because so much about coaching a star performer is about helping them get to that next level, and often this occurs by means of a stretch assignment. So as an HR professional, this is where you might want to check in with your star performers, specifically on how they're doing on these stretch assignments. You can ask them things like, how is it going? What's working well? Where are you struggling? Listen to what they have to say here and base where you may need to specifically intervene or otherwise help support them based on what you're hearing. What you don't want to do is ignore them. From an HR standpoint here, keep your eyes open. Who are those star performers that you know are going through coaching in one of the areas that you support? And what makes the most sense in terms of identifying that right cadence of any one-on-one checkpoints that you might need to have with them to check in and see how things are going? I think the key thing with the star performer is not to assume that simply because they are high potential, they are those stars, that their coaching is automatically going to progress smoothly without your support. Many times I know, especially in HR, having worked in HR organizations myself many years, we primarily tend to react to those that come to us, right? Keep in mind that it's not just the quote-unquote squeaky wheel that needs our help here. And these might be just very quick check-ins, because what you could find is that things are going just fine. But by simply providing that forum one-on-one with them, you're going to be in the best position to know that and confirm that, and also keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on and where things might not be fine, and you can do something to help support. Okay. Next, we have the coachee, the leader, going through coaching who struggles with performance, particularly based on the tasks involved in what they are trying to achieve. There's a gap between what the intent that they're trying to have and the impact that they're having. These are oftentimes individuals who do have those performance gaps that have been there for a little bit. Some of them might not even be aware of them. In some cases, they might be new, or they may represent performance gaps that they simply don't agree with, don't view them as a gap themselves. Key thing to consider here is how can we help raise their awareness around these gaps? That's a crucial place to begin. These performance gaps they have could be caused by a skill deficiency, or not, or some other obstacle to helping them be successful and successfully complete their work tasks. Oftentimes, these are individuals that are newer to their role, newer to a new task in their role. So they tend to be prime candidates for targeted coaching around a transition that they're going through or a new behavior that may now be required in their role that simply wasn't before. From an accountability standpoint, what works? Well, here is an individual that you could provide some real support for first by clarifying coaching expectations from the start. And in your role from an HR standpoint, how can you be explicit around what coaching is designed to do for them? Really, it's designed to provide them with that additional support. Really, it is an investment in their development, as well as being explicit around what coaching is not designed to do. It doesn't mean that they're in trouble. It doesn't mean that their job security is in jeopardy. And clarifying these things can go a long way to reassuring them, which then will help them get in the right mindset to be open for what that coaching experience can do for them. Another thing that you can do is be that extra set of eyes on their coaching plan. From your HR experience, this can really come in handy, right? Ensuring that the plan is realistic and achievable with their existing commitments. The HR knowledge that you have and that frame of reference that you can provide is instrumental, and this is how you can help set up the schedule to have any confidential conversations around how coaching is progressing with them by pulling in your perspective. They are the ones to really appreciate any additional one-on-one time with you at a couple of what might be really crucial points in the coaching engagement. Because at the end of the day, with this type of accountability challenge in particular, these are the individuals that might be feeling the most overwhelmed. There's something fearful that they feel about coaching and what this experience means about them or to them or regarding their future career perhaps. So from a very practical standpoint, these might be the individuals who, because of this sense of overwhelm, just start showing up for coaching sessions unprepared. They're not sure what to work on or how to begin to tackle what was agreed upon from the last coaching session. And you start to get feedback perhaps from a coach or from your own observations or from their manager that something is always getting in the way from them progressing on their coaching goals. So this is particularly where you can help them at the beginning. What support can you give? What check-ins can you have at the beginning until they've experienced some success to help them build their confidence? And that's the key consideration for you there in an HR role. How can you provide that support from the onset? What you don't want to do here is take on too much for them. So while you want to be on the lookout for ways to support, don't let this detract from their responsibility in the coaching. Because remember, ultimately, they still need to be the drivers of their own development. Now, one quick example, I've seen some very well-intended HR folks go so far as to schedule. Okay, so I'll help, whatever I can do to help. I'll schedule the 6 months of coaching, and I'll coordinate calendars between the leader and their manager for these touch points, and I'll do so regularly between the coach and the individual. We don't have time for that. And don't let that take away from their opportunities to own their own coaching. They need to show that they have skin in the game as well. Okay. So the next struggling performer is the leader who is struggling in their roles, not because of performance skill gaps, but because of how they relate to others. Think about individuals who might fit into this, right? These are folks who tend to view their performance gaps as caused by the organization, a change, management, coworkers, customers, anyone else on a list, but really not them. And because of this, they might really struggle in engaging effectively with peers and other work colleagues that rely on interacting with them in an effective manner. They might be difficult to coach initially. They might react negatively to any assessment feedback, especially something like 360 data that sheds a new light that they weren't ready to acknowledge. And because of this, they might want to spend time and energy blaming others or making excuses instead of owning their responsibility in the situation. And because of this also, they might have difficulty taking that ownership of their coaching goals, or simply might object to the coaching process or not take it seriously. So from an accountability standpoint, what to do here? Start by helping them understand their contribution to the situation and how their behaviors impact those around them. This is the case where you might likely get involved in a deep conversation with them and their manager prior to the start of coaching to really make sure that you understand whatever issues and dynamics interpersonally are at hand. This is where you might want to really recommend going through, having that leader go through something like a 360 feedback process. That is what goes a long way to raising new insights and awareness around their behaviors and how they're being perceived. What I find is that it becomes difficult for a leader to refute that full circle feedback from different sources that all tend to be saying the same thing. And from a practical standpoint, you can help not only with that, but also in encouraging their manager or yourself to provide insight and approval, perhaps, into something as specific as a 360 rater list, so that they're not just selecting whomever might represent a quote-unquote fan club for them, but also that they're getting a broad perspective of feedback. Another thing you can do here, Help by making sure that you've communicated clear ground rules for the coaching so they know what's expected of them, and that everyone involved that we talked about knows what's expected, and that we've got commitment that everyone's in agreement with that. Because these ground rules and these commitments are what you can reference later on if you see any slippage on their part. What you don't want to do here is get stuck in the story. Individuals that are struggling with relationships often tend to get focused on their side of the situation as a means to justify their behaviors. And because you are internal and they might view you as that internal confidant, given your knowledge of the organization and its culture and the individuals involved, they might want to really have your ear with that story. Important piece here is to focus them back on their contributions to the situation. Keep directing them back to their opportunities to behave differently based on data and observations. Asking them things like, well, what do you see yourself doing more of or less of or differently? What would it mean to you or your team or your manager if you were to insert here? Making sure that you and their manager are on the same page regarding key messages that you can both reinforce during conversations together is another good technique to employ. Okay, so next we have the stuck performer. And these are individuals who might appear that they've begun to coast in their roles. You don't see them really raising their hands to assist their team on things or take on any new assignments. And they also might not seem that interested in building new skills for themselves or making performance improvements. And instead, they're communicating that I'm just happy with the way things are, and I'm just happy doing what I've been doing. So these are also folks that tend to have some real difficulty adapting to work changes, right, in systems or processes, et cetera. No surprise. And they might not seem interested in progressing within the organization, right? And because of that, you've probably noticed that development opportunities have been passing them by. This is the individual that without progress, their future employability may very well be in jeopardy, simply because they're not willing to keep up with the times. So the accountability is important here, and let's focus on the second bullet for that. This could be the place to start that makes the difference. Ask them, what part of the change or their situation do they feel good about? What can they do well? What can they get behind? And support them there. And starting from that place of interest and strength is a means to build their buy-in to the change, and then using that information to gauge the type of coaching and even coach that would best support them in working through that for themselves will be critical. You can use this then to get their commitment to identify any specific actions that they should take toward that change, and leverage that in those check-ins that you have with them, those one-on-ones during your touch-point meetings, where you ask them how things are going, where you focus on the positive and any wins that they've experienced from the coaching, as well as hearing their perspective on what you can do to further support them and further help. What you don't want to do here is just assume that the coaching is working well, that no news is good news. Our stuck performer is often not going to reach out for a lifeline or see you to do that, so consider how you can support their progress and further broaden their perspective during your conversations with them. Hopefully through the coaching, they're raising their awareness, they're questioning prior assumptions, and as a result, they should be ripe for new ideas and new insights as part of their coaching. And this is where you can question and ask them around any excitement they've had around new insights that they've gained. Another thing to do from a practical standpoint is think about other organizational or HR initiatives where they can get involved, and invite them to that. Invite their perspective, share topics of interest, share things that relate to their coaching goals in an effort to continue broadening their perspective. And let them know that your door is always open for them if they need to talk, and encourage them to use it. All right. Now, last but not least, we have what we call the solid but narrow performer. These are individuals who are really, really good at what they do, but they could be further leveraged. They might be currently underutilized because they're so focused on the narrow. And because of that, over time, they could eventually run the risk of stagnating in their roles. So again, really good at keeping their nose to the grindstone, but because of this, tend to be so narrowly focused. Excellent at what they do, see their jobs narrowly, and miss what implications of job changes might be as a result of where the organization's going in the future. And they don't really see that broader alignment between how broader organizational initiatives or changes might impact them or focus them on what they could be doing differently. So what they'd really benefit from is that broader perspective of their role, understanding of whatever their transferable skills are that would help with their career development to move them forward. And some things to keep in mind here. So from an accountability perspective, you want to make sure that you, from your HR standpoint, help them see how they fit to the bigger picture and any changes associated with that. And think about ways you can leverage your knowledge of the organization, of HR processes or systems or initiatives to help draw that line of sight between their contributions and the organization's success. And another thing you can do is ask them about their future goals confidentially. Help them explore how they can start thinking about what that path might be between where they are today and where they'd like to be. How can you discuss their skills and development areas to address as part of their career progression, and how can you make sure that there's alignment with that to their coaching goals? What you don't want to do is let them get by with establishing superficial coaching goals, right? They might tend to do that because of their narrow focus. Give their coach even a heads up to look out for this and enlist the coach's support in making sure that they push back to ensure that there's robust goals that get presented at that initial kickoff meeting. And you can also use your knowledge of goal setting and development based on your HR experience to review their plans with a real critical eye and help raise areas where you see that details or actions could be enhanced. And while coaching is ongoing, help them think about what those underlying issues are that you might be seeing or hearing that demonstrate any kind of lack of commitment to real change. And do you get the sense in just how things are progressing that they're just kind of going through the motions? Or you get the sense that they're not fully committed to the process and just want to go back to what they were doing? Raise those concerns to them and give them an opportunity to respond. Think about those one-on-one candid discussions that you can have as needed to help them see how they view the coaching is fitting in with their ultimate career plans, and engage their coach in what you're witnessing to make sure that they're addressing it concurrently as well. So that is our solid but narrow performer. Now, regardless of the type of particular accountability challenge, what we're looking at here are just general questions. We want to leave you with some final overall practical considerations in your role as HR support to check in with those leaders going through coaching and assess their responses to how coaching is going. So you can ask them, we've targeted this both during coaching as well as after coaching. During coaching, quickly after that first session, how did it go? Do you see any challenges in the coaching itself or in working with this particular coach? Any new insights or surprises that you've gleaned even at this point? And then at those different one-on-one touch points, and then especially after the coaching, the questions that we're looking at here. So regardless of how you see your particular check-ins playing out, you're going to think about what the right cadence is for those. You might want to kind of match them to those broader check-ins between the coach and manager as well, either just before or just after. You might want to add a specific one-on-one check-in based on a goal deadline or where you see early on support being needed or them benefiting from that with you. So keeping all of these things in mind, we hope that we've given you some new insight and considerations to help you think about how you can support and hold your leaders accountable as they go through coaching and development in your organizations. And with that, I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I'll turn it over to you, Jessie, to help make sure that we get the questions answered.
Sure. So if you have additional questions, feel free to type them in now. We got a few really excellent questions during registration that I wanted to ask you, Terry. So someone wrote in, I'm particularly interested in hearing strategies of how to do leadership coaching when leaders are juggling multiple priorities or they're burned out.
That's a fantastic question. Thank you, Jessie. Yes, because the reality of coaching is that, things aren't getting done to the way that the leader would like, and challenges are happening because we are often struggling with so many multiple priorities at once. Let's think back to that it takes a village slide, because I think one of the real benefits to address this is taking that broader perspective, and as part of that kickoff conversation, making sure that everyone involved is on the same page in terms of what are those other priorities and what might need to happen to set this leader up for success. I'll give you a very, very quick example. This one didn't happen particularly during the kickoff, but if they know this going in, you can address it head on. This was about a couple of months into a year-long coaching engagement with a high potential leader that I was working with, who was part of this global organization's high potential leadership development program. And a couple of months into the coaching, he shared with me that not only did he have a very busy day job and was he leading a couple of high profile enterprise-wide projects for the organization, but he expressed a little concern and frankly frustration that his manager just kind of tapped him on the shoulder and said, I want you to lead this new project as well. And he was frustrated because he wasn't sure how he could be successful with all of these priorities, and this element of burnout was already there for this individual. So one of the things that I worked with him on in that particular session was what did he need, what were his goals based on this, and how could we identify those key messages for him to advocate for himself with his manager. And the end result of that was the manager hadn't considered all the implications, was completely supportive and receptive in terms of the request to not be placed as leader of this additional new team, and it really put him in a position to succeed through the rest of the coaching by engaging the right individuals in managing these multiple priorities. And from a burnout standpoint, another thing, this is where the coach is so critical, because during those ongoing discussions are where you can delve into those antecedents and consequences around the burnout and help them come up with coaching strategies.
Okay, thank you, Terry. So Julia just wrote in, what metrics do you use to show that the strategies work? And do you find that some types of coachees are generally more successful in meeting coaching goals? Or is it based on the criteria you described at the beginning of the presentation, that best coachee criteria?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. That was Julie.
Julia.
So the metrics, it gets a little bit difficult because we're not creating widgets, and we're not in a position to be able to say, that this leader is now going to create more of those. And that's where I find in my experience that this coaching plan is so instrumental, because that is what's vetted in that kickoff conversation, and that is where everyone is then on the same page to say specifically what is it that the goals are, what actions does this coachee or leader plan to take to achieve those goals, what support resources are needed to help above and beyond the coaching, what time frame is involved, and then what does success look like. So at midpoint check-in, that's the very same document that we pull out in that conversation for and I always say it's the coachee, the leader's meeting to lead. I'm there to support, and I do in terms of reaching out and creating that forum for the manager and HR to provide feedback from their perspective, but that's where we check in. What examples do you have? Those metrics, I guess the best way to put it is, it comes in the form of those examples. A year ago I would have done this in this situation, but now I did this. And that becomes fodder for some very robust discussion, and then opens the door for additional feedback from the others in the room.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, someone wrote in, what are some key approaches to getting leaders bought into coaching if they haven't done it yet? I assume it means a first-time coachee.
Absolutely, right. Oftentimes I find in my experience, great question, is that someone that has been identified for coaching reacts initially kind of skeptical and apprehensive. Okay, why? What's not working? Am I in trouble? What's wrong? So very natural response. I think the key here is to be really explicit. The slides that I talked about in terms of what is coaching and what it is not, making sure that they really understand and have an opportunity to ask questions around the goals and why this investment is being made and what the purpose is. And then also, another thing that I found helpful there for the buy-in is for someone who's really struggling with considering how coaching could benefit them, is reaching out to other leaders that have gone through coaching and asking for their permission to be put in touch with the individual to share their own personal experience with coaching and the benefits that they see it achieving. That right there is what I find to be so powerful, because it's an individual from within their own organization that can speak to their real world experience and benefits with it.
Okay, well, I don't see any further questions, so thank you all for attending. If you have questions that we didn't address here, feel free to reach out to us directly at 510-463-0333. And please visit our newly redesigned website at www.3dgroup.net. Thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.